Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to welcome everyone to the Special Legislative Commission to study and evaluate Rhode Island's electric and natural gas transmission and distribution system infrastructure. Before we begin and get right into the agenda, I do want to reiterate our charge and why we're here. And I'm going to read from the bill, the legislation which created this commission. Whereas all Rhode Islanders depend on and deserve a safe and reliable electric power and natural gas transmission and distribution infrastructure system to meet the demands of today and the expected demands of tomorrow. Whereas a dependable electrical and natural gas transmission and distribution system infrastructure is critical to homeowners as well as businesses. And it is imperative that Rhode Island plans for the needs of today and tomorrow. To that end, a reliable and resilient electric and natural gas transmission and distribution infrastructure system is paramount. I want to leave you with one other piece. The purpose of said commission, which we discussed at our previous meeting as well, shall be to make a comprehensive study and evaluate Rhode Island's electric and natural gas transmission and distribution system infrastructure. That's why we're here. I want to welcome everyone here today. I will welcome our invited guests here in a short bit. I just want to recap of where we were in December, talk about where we are now, talk about some of the, I'll say, trials and tribulations of what took us so long to get here. But we do want to thank our guests that will be with us today. You recall in December when we first met, we received an overview of electricity in New England, and specifically in Rhode Island. How it's generated, where it's generated, who generates it, the transition over time from coal and oil to primarily generate electricity in Rhode Island, to a increased growth to natural gas. We wanted to do that first because we're going to vector now into the natural gas piece. We heard about how much was generated from hydro, how much was generated from nuclear, and how much was generated from renewables. We spent a fair amount of time on the growth of renewables, and we'll talk a little bit about that today, I would suspect, as we move forward into today's conversation and presentation on the topic of natural gas, New England, the region, and Rhode Island. And it has some different nuances that you would expect that were not the same as it relates to electricity. With that said, I want to move right into welcoming our guests for today. Our guest for today, the speaker for today, we're excited to have to give us a New England interstate natural gas overview is Thomas Pinkston. Thomas is a senior market advisor with the Office of Energy Policy and Innovations Policy Division of Policy Development at the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. If that's not a mouthful, I'm not certain what is, but we're certain, also known as FERC. So Thomas, we're glad to have you here. We're also great to have, I see Keith is there again somewhere. I lost Keith for a minute. Keith Maisel. I may pronounce his name incorrectly. We're also glad to have Keith with us as well. We spent many weeks, a couple months, going back and forth to find the right person. I want to thank Keith. Keith, thank you very much for your perseverance on your end, perseverance on my end. We finally connected, got to the right person, connected us with Thomas, and we're glad you're with us today. So as we conducted the last hearing, I'd like to do the same thing today. We're going to let Thomas walk through his material. We will get a copy of the presentation to everybody subsequent to the hearing. We will post it online as well, so everybody will have access subsequent to the hearing. But we're going to hold questions till the end, once Thomas has been able to go through his material. Thomas, over to you, and I believe you should be able to share your presentation from your end.
Yes, thank you, Senator, and good afternoon, and we appreciate the opportunity to be before the session. Let me try to share the presentation now. Can everyone see the presentation?
Well done, Thomas. I can see it here at the State House anyway.
Okay, thank you. Before going any further, just, let me state this is a product of staff, and the views expressed are those of staff and not necessarily reflective of the commission, its chairman, or any individual commissioner. So please keep that in mind. This briefing will be an overview, as just mentioned, of natural gas in New England from a federal perspective. It'll be pretty high level given the range of topics. I'd like to cover federal regulation, infrastructure and its implications for New England and Rhode Island to the extent possible, supply and demand, both historical and outlooks, the role of natural gas as we transition to a low carbon economy, and then conclude with a couple key takeaways. Please don't hesitate to ask any questions, and I know the Senator mentioned save them to the end, and we'll try to answer them, or if we can't, we'll get back to you with the information as soon as possible. So let's start with federal regulation. I won't be reading from all of the slides, as some of them are fairly text heavy, but just try to hit the highlights. These are the primary federal regulators. And we'll begin with the Department of Transportation Pipeline and Hazardous Safety Materials Administration. This administration develops and enforces federal pipeline safety standards. Their responsibilities include inspecting facilities, investigations of safety incidents, as well as maintaining contact with pipeline operators. The Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, my employer, is the federal agency that regulates the transmission and wholesale sale of electricity and natural gas in interstate commerce. And we also regulate the transportation of oil by pipeline in interstate commerce. I think significantly, as far as the public is concerned, the Commission approves the siting of interstate natural gas pipelines and also establishes rates for the services. Finally, FERC is the lead agency for coordinating environmental reviews and compliance when a promoter of a project applies for a certificate to site that project. In coordinating other agencies, we'll cooperate with the Environmental Protection Agency, PHMSA, which I just mentioned, the Department of the Interior, the National Park Service, Army Corps of Engineers, among others. So that's done when we're evaluating an application for new facilities. A little more detail on siting pipeline facilities. This is authority under Section 7C of the Natural Gas Act. Constructing a pipeline requires the company to undertake routing and site planning, environmental analyses, mitigation planning, and consultation with local communities. Upon the award of a certificate, the certificate for construction, the company receives the right of eminent domain. So this is something you may be well aware of. A company will first attempt to negotiate an easement. However, if the company cannot reach an agreement with a landowner, which includes compensation, the Natural Gas Act gives the company authority to obtain that easement by the exercise of the right of eminent domain. The eminent domain proceedings are initiated by the company in the courts, and the courts then justify or determine compensation to the landowner. At that point, FERC is not involved in eminent domain proceedings. So eminent domain, I bring that up because it's currently under consideration by the Commission, and this is an example. In January 2021, FERC issued an order 871A seeking further comment on modifications to its regulations that and this was done last summer, that it prohibited initiating pipeline construction depending rehearing requests and the rehearing requests could be by any number of folks. It could be often individuals in the local community or organizations, but this new order inquires whether the commission should withhold authorizations to commence construction during rehearing requests, or prohibit construction only if rehearing requests raise certain issues, specify what those issues would be. Should the construction activities be withheld under both NGA Section 3, which applies to LNG, or Section 7, which is pipelines, establish a time frame, and also give consideration to eminent domain while these rehearing requests are pending. So, these are important issues and currently under consideration by the Commission. Section 4 and 5 of the Natural Gas Act require that rates and charges for pipeline services be just and reasonable, and that's because pipelines are often monopolies. So there are regulated rates, and they're generally set in accordance with one or two basic methodologies. Cost-based rates are those that you're probably most familiar with, in which the company earns back costs plus a reasonable return on investment. FERC also in 96 granted jurisdictional pipelines the option of charging negotiated rates as long as they have a cost-based rates on file. So these are commonly used now, and negotiated rates may put an element of market risk, if you will, into the pricing. So they have some appeal for pipeline companies, and they also may allow for extended terms of discounted pricing. So there's a lot of creativity in negotiated rates, but the requirement is there always be a cost of service based rate as a recourse rate. If negotiated rates, there can't be agreement. Pipeline companies also file Form 2s, which are annual documents which provide detail on their financial and operations, including the ability to calculate rates of return. So Section 5 allows FERC, this is Section 5 of the Natural Gas Act, FERC and third parties to challenge rates. And those third parties would include states, municipalities, state commissions, gas distribution companies. And when there is a challenge, FERC can initiate an investigation into rates. So there have been these FERC Section 5 proceedings. They're typically initiated by the Commission as opposed to third parties, and more often than not, they have to do with pipelines earning above a just and reasonable rate of return and excess of cost of service. So the reason this happens, it dates back to open access in the 90s. Prior to open access, there was a requirement that pipelines have a rate case every 3 years where their rates would be trued up relative to their assets. That's no longer a requirement. So there are instances where depreciation of assets, the pipelines can earn a greater than regulated type return. This is a little bit more current legislation, Energy Policy Act of 2005. It's really probably of most interest to natural gas marketers, but it expressly prohibits natural gas manipulation in energy markets, and also allows civil penalties up to $1 million per violation per day, and that would be in addition to disgorgement of gains earned through manipulation. So, these penalties can get sizable very quickly. If you think, a pipeline, if say there are manipulative trades, it's easy to have 10 or 15 trades per day that could be considered manipulative pending circumstances. So that could be a $15 million penalty. The Natural Gas Act also added some new transparency provisions that allow FERC to see the size of the market with regards to physical traded volumes. So we at the commission communicate with PHMSA, and again, that's the administration or agency responsible for pipeline safety. And I would like to just bring some recent developments to your attention with regards to PHMSA. In 2019, PHMSA issued 3 rules that amended regulations applicable to gas transmission pipelines and included reconfirmation of operating pressures, modifications to integrity management, and assessment of pipelines outside of what are typically called high consequence areas, which may be an urban or more crowded, densely populated area. So these assessments are extending beyond those areas. Some aspect of these rules were 10 years in the making, and they attempt to resolve issues that contributed to a natural gas explosion in 2010 in California. In an ensuing investigation, it was found that the pipeline operator had inadequate integrity management program that failed to detect a defective pipeline segment. So these rules may result in more pipeline replacements. It's conceivable, and I know we've had some of the systems visit FERC, because once again, we're not responsible for safety, but in putting in place these programs, the pipelines have occasionally had summer maintenance that may have caused some reduction in service. And I think they typically try to warn their customers and the commission when that's the case. So now let's talk about pipeline infrastructure. We'll start with the big picture. This is the United States, obviously, North America. And the triangles are storage fields. The red rectangles are gas trading hubs. The purple and pink areas are natural gas basins. And then the heavy shaded blue lines are pipelines. And this would include inter and intrastate transmission lines, but not distribution lines. Usually you see the intrastate lines in large states that have both supply and demand. Texas is the primary example, but also California. Generally, these are interstate pipelines. We don't regulate intrastate pipelines. The lower 48 have more than 300,000 miles of inter and intrastate transmission pipelines in use and 379 active storage fields. Natural gas products can be traded at more than 120 locations. Typically, it's a very liquid and active gas trading market where gas is traded next day, next season, next month, intraday. Alongside the gas physical trades are typically financial derivative trades. Occurs all across the U.S., including Algonquin, the New England area, California, Texas, Chicago, basically you name it. Notable supply basins are among many, are the Appalachian Basin in Pennsylvania, West Virginia, and Ohio, and I'll speak to that in some more detail later. The Permian Basin in West Texas has been very active in the last few years. Importantly, the gas industry has no equivalence to the electricity RTOs, ISOs. Pipelines generally operate independently of one another. As you know, pipelines themselves are precluded from participating in the merchant function or the trading function. Interstate pipelines are, intrastates can. And that was a FERC requirement also coming out of open access. General estimates of U.S. consumption are about 30 trillion cubic feet a year. New England's consumption is under 1 trillion cubic feet. Largest gas consuming area would be the central southwest with Texas, Louisiana, and it's over 13 trillion cubic feet. So now looking a little more specifically at the Northeast, this map includes pipelines again, and in this case, their multicolored code. Production zones as the last map, although the detail shows actual production fields, LNG facilities, and underground storage. As you know, New England has no underground storage reservoirs. However, now New England is relatively close to intense oil and gas development, in the Utica and Marcellus shale basins, and that's very important from this map. And I'll later discuss some of the flow implications of being close to these large areas of supply. The New England region is dependent on LNG. The big natural gas story over the last few years has been exports of LNG. However, New England conversely imports LNG from primarily three operating facilities. And they're shown on the map beginning in the far northeast, the Canaport facility in Canada, and then in the Boston area, Everett and Northeast Gateway. These facilities have a total base load of capacity of 2,100 million cubic feet a day, or more simply 2.1 billion cubic feet a day. Also, there are storage tanks in the region, and this is more of a distribution company issue versus a federal issue, but they're important to particularly peak day send out. According to the Northeast Gas Association, LNG storage capacity in New England among the local distribution companies is 16 BCF, which is quite sizable, and daily send out approaches 1.4 BCF a day. So that's large volumes, and again, those are based on the Northeast Gas Association numbers. Now, turning back to federal regulation, the interstate pipelines into the region are Algonquin Gas Transportation or Transmission, Tennessee Gas Pipeline. Algonquin is running south to north along the coast through New Jersey, New York, and Maryland. Tennessee is west to east through central New York. Then there's Iroquois Gas Transmission down from Canada running south, and Maritimes in Northeast, and Portland Natural Gas also from Canada into New England. In total, these pipelines provide 4.6 BCF a day. So this is the top 10 shippers on the New England pipeline. So you may not be aware, but this information is included pursuant to Commission regulations on the internet informational postings for each pipeline. So it's just available to the public or to regulators or to market participants for that matter. It's updated quarterly, and it's good information to have. It's difficult to generalize about companies as they're so complex, but looking at these shippers, you can see probably roughly 70% are gas distribution companies, energy marketers, and companies involved in the import or export of gas. Less present are electric generation companies or merchant or utility electric generation. However, I make the comment it's difficult to generalize. Many of the marketing companies may be serving electric generation, as the marketing companies may also be serving gas distribution companies under asset management arrangements. So it's difficult to know without further study, where gas on these systems is going and for whom. But this does point out an observation that is often made by regulators, associations, and industry participants, that electric generators, especially merchant generators, hold relatively less firm pipeline capacity than the gas distribution companies. So that's something to keep in mind. And I'll have a few more slides to detail some of these issues as to competing interests for pipeline flows or for gas on the pipeline. Rhode Island is primarily served by Algonquin Gas Transmission and Tennessee Gas Pipeline. Algonquin is a northeast pipeline, 1,100 miles, capacity into Rhode Island, and this information is from pipeline bulletin boards, and the Energy Information Administration is about 275 million cubic feet a day. Tennessee Gas Pipeline is a bit more of a national pipeline. Louisiana, the Gulf of Mexico, South Texas, and into the Northeast, almost 12,000 miles. capacity into Rhode Island, 173 million cubic foot a day, and owned by Kinder Morgan. Total capacity into Rhode Island is 448 million cubic foot a day, or an annual 163 BCF. So this compares to an annual Rhode Island usage of roughly 100 BCF. So this points to a comfortable margin on a volumetric basis. However, important thing to keep in mind, and I guess I'm sure you're aware of this, the New England grid upstream of Rhode Island can experience high utilization. And this is an example, a recent example, February the 11th, 2021. Temperatures in Boston were 29 and a low of 19. So clearly by New England standards, not a particularly cold day, weather conditions well above design day criteria. However, utilization exceeds 95% at several locations. On Tennessee Gas Pipeline on the 200 line, which is running through central New York, you can see, I think it's number 2 on the charts at 95.4%. Algonquin at the Southeast Compressor Station is at, say, 92%. That's at the Connecticut-New York border. Tennessee has another 96.4% utilization. Iroquois is at 95% coming into the U.S. So these are pretty high utilization levels for what's a fairly unremarkable day. So it's not to say if the day had been much colder, there would have been failures to serve or anything like that, because gas can be rerouted and shipped from different directions. But it does point to pretty high utilization of New England infrastructure. The limited pipeline capacity has led to price spikes. Since 2018, there have been periodic occurrences, and you can see this is I should explain what this chart is. The vertical axes are the dollars per MMBTU price per gas. The horizontal axis is time, and it's a plot of Algonquin prices, which are essentially New England city gate prices, versus the TICO pool, which are Appalachian prices. So you can see since 2018, periodic price spikes up to $15. It's high when gas is typically $2 to $3, but not extreme. January the 18th, you saw $80, which at that time was some of the record prices we'd seen for natural gas. That was, I think, a bomb cyclone event. You also saw higher prices in earlier polar vortex events. And this is that that tight pipeline capacity that I mentioned causes competition for gas when you have this intense cold weather. And it's usually not LDCs paying the bulk of these prices. Our gas distribution companies, as they're often priced on monthly prices. They may be out in the spot market for balancing volumes. It could be electric generators. It could be gas marketers who are short. So it's not to say that the consumers are paying all of that $80 price. Since 2018, there have been these $15 type prices, but you haven't seen the above $50 prices. That's due to a couple things. There has been cold weather, but there hasn't been like the 3-day type intense cold that, say, led to the prices. And that cold is particularly a problem when it occurs around weekends, and traders are worried about lining up supply and often may be willing to pay more to have that supply, say, on Friday, as opposed to going into the weekend short and not knowing what's going to happen Monday. So prices can be exacerbated not just by the cold, but when it occurs. And also, interestingly, there's been a little bit greater use of LNG. For instance, in 2017 to 18, New England averaged 0.14 BCF a day of LNG imports, but for 2018 to 19, that number was 0.24. And in addition, the peak use of LNG was higher. So I know there was a fair amount of observation in the press, I believe, in the season of 2018 and 19, how Algonquin prices were muted by the kind of strategic introduction of merchant LNG supplies. So that's will be a good thing from a consumer perspective. Gas availability into New England, and this is a list from the Commission for currently approved or pending projects. Gas deliverability into New England is being increased by approximately 8%, and on an addition of 370 million cubic feet a day, or 0.4 BCF. And you can see from this chart, these are fairly low impact projects that involve increasing compression. So very little pipeline here. I think the CP 1907 Tennessee Gas Pipeline has 2.1 miles of pipe, but generally these are compression upgrades. And again, it's increasing capacity by 8%, which is significant. Okay, so let's talk about energy supply and demand. This is primary energy consumption, so wouldn't include electricity, since electricity is more of a manufactured energy, just basic energy sources. And it includes transportation. So hence, you'll see, for instance, New England as a whole, you have petroleum and other liquids 44%, natural gas 30%, nuclear 10%, renewables 14%. These, I should mention, these are quads, quadrillion BTUs equal to 1 TCF. So the total for New England is 2.85 quads, or 2.9 TCF. So you may remember I mentioned earlier the use of natural gas is 0.9 TCF. Again, this is for all energy uses, including that's used to manufacture electricity. Rhode Island is 0.19 quads, and of that 0.1 TCF is natural gas. What's interesting is that Rhode Island is more dependent on natural gas than New England as a whole, and I believe that's reflective of most electricity in Rhode Island is from natural gas. So you'll see the proportion of natural gas in the primary fuel mix for Rhode Island is 52% versus New England as a whole 30%, less renewable use in Rhode Island than New England as a whole. So that's Rhode Island is, by the standards of the Northeast, a fairly gas-intensive state. This is historical natural gas consumption in New England and Rhode Island. So the vertical axis is average annual use. So it's taking the annual volume and dividing it by 365 to get million cubic foot per day, divided by amongst the traditional consumption sectors: residential, commercial, industrial, electric. So I'll make a few remarks based on 2019 to avoid any distortions in demand that occurred due to COVID, although COVID did not impact natural gas usage to the extent it did oil, but that's just as an aside. For New England in 2019, the share of natural gas consumption was 24% for both residential and commercial, industrial 13%, and electric 42%. In 2011, that share was 22% for residential, 17% commercial, 13 industrial, and 48 electric. So it's a little surprising to see the share of electric relative to the other sectors actually is reduced in 2019 relative to 2011. For Rhode Island, it's similar patterns, other than the share of electricity is greater, but in Rhode Island, natural gas consumption was residential 20%, commercial 13%, and this is in 2019, industrial 9%, and electric 58%. I think looking at both New England and Rhode Island, one could say it's essentially flat to slight decline. I think New England is showing a decline over this time of 0.13%, and Rhode Island has consumption down 2.2%. This is a similar chart, except it's monthly consumption, and it allows you to see seasonal pattern. New England has the greatest demand occurring, no surprise, in the winter months to meet heating needs. So you can kind of see that the seasonal flow of the patterns. The right-hand chart is a similar chart, but it's looking at supply sources for New England. And the categories are LNG, Eastern Canada in orange, Atlantic Canada, which is really diminishing over time. I think those Sable Island and those reserves have declined faster than anticipated. So the gray Atlantic Canada is just not a big source of supply. And then New York, New Jersey, which basically means the pipelines that traverse New York, New Jersey, primarily Algonquin, also Tennessee Gas Pipeline, and to a lesser extent, Iroquois. Clearly, on a volumetric basis, that's where New England is getting its natural gas supply. Although, as noted, LNG is very important on a peak day, design day, very cold winter, to meet cold winter demand. What's important about the New York, New Jersey flows are the makeup of those flows, and that's changed over the last 10 years. And let me show you with the next slide. So looking at this on a kind of broader regional basis, because you kind of have to because of the interconnectivity, but we'll say the greater Northeast, and in this chart it happens to be the Northeast, including New England, the mid-Atlantic and Appalachian regions have actually become an exporter of natural gas to the mid-continent and the Southeast. You can see in this chart that we're beginning in 2011, dry gas production for this region was 4.5 BCF a day. And again, this is what I would call the greater Northeast. In flows from the Southeast U.S., generally the Gulf of Mexico and South Texas were 4.8 BCF a day. By the end of 2020, production for this greater region is a staggering 34 BCF a day and exporting over 12 BCF a day to the Midwest and Southeast. So this is really amazing. You've probably heard for years the idea of New England being at the end of the pipe, which is still true. It's literally at the end of the pipe, but it's very close to some of the most prolific, if not the most prolific, natural gas reserves in the country. And it's basically turned the market upside down. Gas has always flown south to north. Now you're seeing it flow north to south, and its destination as it's being exported to the Southeast and mid-continent are typically going to be industrial users in the mid-continent, or in the Southeast, industrial users plus exporters of LNG. So it's kind of a fascinating phenomenon, and it's something that's happened. We're talking 10 years here, which is not a lot of time really to see an industry transform like this. So let's look at projections. And Energy Information Administration does an annual energy outlook with a very large economic model, and they do good work. And this is kind of a projection of New England consumption by end use, again, the same sectors, and also a projection of the resource mix for utilities. So it's for the next 30 years, and we're looking at 5-year increments. Total consumption in New England is projected to decline by over 7%, and that's due to the penetration of renewable energy, which causes a decline of almost 40% in electric sector gas demand, and that offsets some modest growth in the other demand segments, notably residential and commercial. And you can see on the right the clear falling off of natural gas generation, although some capacity is retained, as is nuclear, but the dramatic increase in renewables. I believe in New England, the renewables are generally a mix of wind and solar. In other parts of the country, you see maybe more solar, but there you see the natural gas consumption is projected to decline due to renewable encroachment. So let's see what that means for gas. Renewables, electric generation in general, but particularly renewables, place some unique demands on natural gas. So this chart and the next were provided by Kinder Morgan presentations to staff. And I think they illustrate some of these issues very well. Local distribution companies, gas LDCs, are primarily for space heating. Hourly usage follows a consistent pattern. Daily usage is fairly easy to predict by temperatures. Electric generation can have almost instantaneous up and down ramps. Hourly usage can vary significantly. For instance, if there's an unanticipated loss of, say, a coal or a nuclear unit. So this is only exacerbated as renewable penetration increases, and not to say that's a bad thing, but it's just something that has to be managed. Because renewables are intermittent, the ramping needs may be greater, and also because they're being used to a greater extent, gas is being used to a lesser extent. So you have kind of a double reason why gas may suddenly be ramping quickly. It's not being used as often, and it also is filling in for resources that may flicker on and off. So I know there's been a lot of discussion with the events in Texas over the last month with the outages and gas not being available or wind not being available. So there's just a lot of challenging operational issues around this. And I think setting aside these events in Texas, they're generally being managed fairly well in regions like California and SPP, which already have a sizable amount of renewables. But the load following on the part of pipelines means that they often need to provide a capacity above the average daily rate, which is kind of how their systems are designed to provide an average daily rate. And they can do that with storage, and they can do it with line pack. And often that'll manifest itself as what are called hourly and no-notice services. So there's specific services that are available for users that want to have this additional capacity above an average daily rate. This is relevant to the commission in that we typically approve these type of services, and they're included in filed tariffs. So this is a little bit more complicated chart, but it tries to speak to these issues. In the upper right hand is just a chart of hourly deliverability, and the dark black horizontal line at 1 is ratable flow, which just means if you take a shipper's daily flow and divide by 24, and then the red line is showing non-ratable flow, either above or below, and it's kind of in the form of a curve which reflects, in this case, I think, solar energy. So during the middle of the day, there's a lot of solar energy, and you're really not needing the gas, hence there's very little flow. But in the mornings and evenings, the solar energy is not available, so you need more gas. The gas is compressible up to a point. Pipelines can fill their pipelines with gas, and that's called line pack, and increases in pressure. as line pack decreases, pressure decreases. Pressure is the way a pipeline is able to serve, all parts of its system. There's limits, there's safety issues with maximum allowable operating pressure. What this chart is trying to convey is that there is operational flexibility, and pipelines, will try. It's hard to generalize, but I think they'll allow non-ratable flows if the system can tolerate it. It just depends as you get later in the day, and that would be moving to the right on the horizontal axis. The vertical axis is line pack. You have less and less capability for variability of flows. This is showing, and if you look at the red arrow in the middle of the plot, it's showing some of the hours. So, for instance, at hour 16, which is at the end of the period where solar energy has been available and little need for the natural gas, you have a much higher operating pressure and hence flexibility than you do at hours 0, 23, and 7, where there's been a greater draw on gas. So this is just, you can imagine trying to manage this across multiple shippers and multiple generators and multiple types of resources. And it's just an interesting depiction of the issues. So continuing on the theme of low carbon and renewable energy, you've probably heard of renewable natural gas, and it's derived from organic waste material. Biogas consists of methane and carbon dioxide with other elements, and it can be cleaned to produce renewable natural gas that can be delivered by the pipeline infrastructure. So it's considered renewable because you're taking it out of the atmosphere as opposed to venting it and then burning it in place of gas that is not renewable. According to estimates, the U.S. could produce approximately 2 to 5 trillion cubic feet of renewable natural gas in the next 20 years. So that's 6 to 15% of current U.S. production. That's significant. Within a FERC perspective, there are some tariff issues. Each tariff has specifications for natural gas quality. This is something that FERC is increasingly seeing and thinking about. Presently, exceptions or language specific to RNG are not included under FERC tariffs. As a result, requirements vary between pipeline networks. There can be other compounds in renewable natural gas, such as ammonia, hydrogen, chlorine, copper, etc. These constituents are captured within the tariff under a category called other trace constituents and objectionable matter. So as greater quantities of these compounds are introduced into pipelines, there could be a modification of gas quality provisions, and it depends how much of this gas is being blended with traditional natural gas. That will require coordination with shippers and other pipelines. This is something that FERC does a lot. Coordinating pipeline and shipper interests is an ongoing expertise, and that should provide for efficiencies to the eventual transportation of more renewable natural gas. So maybe a little further away on the practicality spectrum, hydrogen, may potentially be blended with natural gas and pipeline infrastructure. Electrical current is used to separate hydrogen from oxygen. If this electricity is attained from renewable sources, it will produce energy without emitting carbon dioxide. That resulting hydrogen can then be stored and burned when needed. Around the globe, utilities are investigating with blending hydrogen into the natural gas grid. It's been proposed as a means of increasing the output and storability of renewable energy systems. If implemented with low concentrations, less than 15% hydrogen by volume, this strategy of storing and delivering renewable energy has appeared to be viable. It has some issues. It can cause what's called hydrogen embrittlement, which can weaken metal or polyethylene pipes and increase leakage risks. This is particularly true in high pressure pipes. I think a lot of the investigation has been with distribution or lower pressure pipelines. This would likely require modification of gas quality provisions in a pipeline's tariff. It may be, and there were a lot of good discussions this year at the NARUC Winter Policy Summit, and no conclusions yet. Some speculation that it may be challenging to find broad, cost-effective uses for hydrogen. It has relatively low energy density, high cost, and its low concentration use in pipelines may limit application to decarbonizing the most challenging sectors, such as industrial uses of natural gas, shipping, and long-distance trucking. But it's all going to be a function of cost. So that's certainly promising. So, conclude, I guess, a couple key takeaways. New England is historically said to be located at the end of the pipe, but it is now sitting next to some of the most prolific production basins in the U.S. and having the potential to reduce New England's energy costs and reliability concerns. It's worth noting that you probably wouldn't see the freeze-offs in production in these northern production zones that you saw in Texas, where freeze-offs of productions contributed to the lack of availability of fuel. In the north, it's more standard to winterize the facilities because cold weather is much more frequent. So, that's kind of the idea about reliability concerns can be reduced, and the gas is just traveling over less distance. And something I'm sure you're all aware, volumetrically, natural gas demand is projected to be flat. However, peak day will continue to be challenging given the tight infrastructure. So that concludes the presentation today. I appreciate everyone's attention and can answer any questions.
Thomas, thank you very much. Well done on the presentation. I believe you covered all the topics we discussed. I have several questions, but I do want to open it up to the committee for question, comment, so I can see everybody. Can we go to the screen to see everybody? Is that possible? I think we're getting there. Thomas, can you unshare?
Yeah, I'm trying to find the...
It's okay. We're watching you. We're going to make you sweat a little bit. So we're going to start counting. 1, 2, no. Sorry.
All right, let me see. There we go. I'm more used to using Teams, but I think
That's okay. There we go. Well done, Thomas. You can put that on your resume now. You can go from share to unshare on WebEx. Well done.
Yeah, all right.
I'm not certain I would have figured it out as quick as you did, so well done. Questions or comments for Thomas? So Thomas, I have one, and I want to go through a few after. You talked about renewable natural gas on slide 28. You don't have to go to the slide. And both from a pipeline perspective and end user, what are the implications that need to be considered from a renewable natural gas perspective as it relates to the pipeline and potentially the end user who has a gas furnace at their house?
Well, as long as the non-methane constituents have been removed, there probably are no implications with renewable natural gas. It will be indistinct from traditional natural gas. The concern by the pipelines and the commission would just be to ensure there are no other elements that could introduce some type of contamination, either in the transportation or the use of the gas or both. And, again, this is something that the pipelines and your shippers will work through with the commission refereeing. It's also a function of how much RNG is blended with traditional natural gas. On many systems, it's going to be less than 0.1%. It's just not an issue. If you did a particular system reaching 5 or 10%, the pipeline would want to be careful.
Okay. One follow-up on that with regards to in order to generate, as you indicated, from methane from landfills, let's say, there's some cost to do that. Does the cost outweigh do we potentially, if we're looking to decarbonize, are we generating more carbon by creating natural gas from the methane, or can you talk to that?
I don't think it would generate more methane because it's methane. Number one, it's displacing existing traditional gas, and number two, it's methane that might typically the waste fill gas be vented into the atmosphere. There are cost issues with RNG, and that's probably the biggest impediment because they're modest volumes, and there are costs involved with developing the RNG and attaching it to the interstate pipelines, or it could be attached directly to a distribution pipeline, which may, in some cases, make more sense because the pressure needs would be less. But I think most industry participants believe that the costs are the biggest impediment to the widespread use of RNG, not the issues with regards to contaminants. Those can certainly be resolved.
But let me be more specific, I guess. I apologize. Are we generating more carbon in order to use that methane gas?
No.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure.
Other questions for Thomas?
Yes, Lou.
Whoever that is, just indicate who you are and ask the question.
Bill Horan here.
Hello, Bill. Go ahead.
Hi. Slide 27 would kind of give us an idea of additional storage of gas we would need locally in Rhode Island if we meet the 30% number for renewables, or wind and solar, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
Can the pipeline dynamic range handle that now? Or how much must we add locally, the storage?
This was the slide that showed the ratable versus non-ratable deliverability. It's hard to say. It's very hard to say without knowing New England-wide each distribution company's design day, and then the non-utility generation. And the calculations are completely different on a peak day versus an average annual day. So it's just impossible to say, without knowing this additional information. As to the new requirements for pipeline capacity or LNG storage, I think that 8% that's being added is a good start.
Thank you, Thomas. Thank you, Thomas. Other questions?
I'm sorry. It's impossible for me to say. Again, others could answer that question, but you would need a lot more additional information about design day.
Thank you. Other questions?
Thank you. I think that's the area we've got to get into later, though.
Thank you, Bill. That was on slide 27, correct?
Yeah.
Bill? Okay. Other questions for Bill? For Thomas, sorry. Sorry, Bill. So, Thomas, I have a follow-up question. I want to get back to some basic stuff after. When you talked about on slide 29 regarding hydrogen, the ability to mix hydrogen into the system, into the existing infrastructure. Can you talk about the same thing with regards to impact on the pipeline, impact on the end user who has gas to heat their house?
Yeah. And again, hydrogen is not nearly, at least in my experience, being discussed as commonly as renewable natural gas. But I think the hydrogen potentially has the issue. It's not so much a contaminant, but particularly has the issue to affect the steel in a pipeline or the appliance materials, and they call it hydrogen embrittlement, and could lead to leaks. So that's the concern, and it depends on the concentration of the hydrogen.
What's the expected concentration? Is it similar to gasoline in a car where we have 10, 15% ethanol? Are we looking at that kind of percentage or no?
Well, on the experiments that have been done, or I think the studies that have been done, they're looking at 15 to 20% and saying that is acceptable, although these are not studies that have been before FERC. These are more just industry-wide studies. If you were using hydrogen in a car, I guess for transportation, we're often it's often hydrogen fuel cells, where the hydrogen is used to in a fuel cell to produce electricity. So that's different versus burning it for energy and transporting it through traditional pipeline infrastructure.
Correct.
I think in the case with the hydrogen fuel cells, then can it economically compete with what batteries in EVs?
One follow-up on that, we'll go back to other questions again on the hydrogen piece. So we're separating out we're using water. I assume we're going to separate the hydrogen from the oxygen in water, correct?
Right.
So can you talk a little bit about the power consumption, the power draw, the power needed? Does that potentially require more energy than what we're going to produce and use?
Well, I think the efficiencies it's a good question. The efficiencies aren't that great, and that's one reason why the economics are difficult. And if, for instance, hydrocarbon fuels are used in that process, you may not be having any net emissions benefits. So you often see folks point to what's called green hydrogen, where you use renewables to produce that electricity, which is then used to generate the hydrogen. There you have a zero emission process. So it's clean. It's just the economics are challenging. And, I think one of the comments at NARUC is that hydrogen always seems to be 10 years away. So I don't sound critical about it, but I think the combination of relatively low conversion efficiencies along with just the cost of the process itself are a challenge.
Thank you. Other questions for Thomas? Just ask the question.
This is Bill again. Is there a freeze-up problem with the hydrogen? Are we more sensitive then?
I don't know. I'm sorry, I don't know. I can try to find that information for you.
Thank you, Tom.
I wanted to respond to your other question too, and I think it was a really good question about kind of looking at the regional reliability and what could we say about pipeline capacity needed. That is a good question, but the commission itself doesn't really do that. We don't have any reliability planning. Each state, has a public service commission, and within that public service commission are the utilities that kind of do the reliability planning. And we've had others come to us and ask about that. And, it's something people ask about a lot, but it's just, unlike the power side, there is no reliability planning on the gas side.
Thank you, Tom. Let me go back.
Certainly, I was going to say, certainly the pipelines plan to meet their firm commitments. The LDCs, our gas utilities, plan to meet their adequacy of supply, and the public utility commissions are watching them. So that, is a proxy for reliability planning, but the commission itself doesn't do that. And we certificate pipeline projects, but only when the industry brings them to us. So
maybe we need to help you respectfully, I'll say, become like ISO New England and do that. Because here's the specific I'll bring up. I noticed on your chart, which was the reason for the impetus for this commission, And I do want to recognize the senators that are here as well as the rest of the committee members in a minute. Well, I didn't see on your on your dates, maybe because it wasn't a long enough stint, January 21st of 2019. It was the coldest day in who knows how long. Single digits here in the end of the line, as you say, the end of the G line here in Rhode Island. And while we have resiliency and reliability expected to be covered by the transmission and distribution side, well, it didn't work that day because we had 3 failures happen, probably 4. Forget about the communication per minute, but we had 3 failures all happen at the same time. So from the perspective of reliability and resiliency, it didn't exist that day. And because of it, 10,000 customers, some with damage to their facility, some who couldn't be in their house because they had no heat for that week and it had to be shut off and go back and, because of safety. Everybody was okay because of that, which was great. The way it was handled was phenomenal with regards to not an issue of any safety issues for individuals or businesses, which was great. But from a resiliency and reliability perspective, if we look back to that fateful day of January 21st, 2019, we'd say to ourselves, yeah, we weren't too resilient or reliable.
Well, yeah, that's a good, yeah, thank you for bringing that up. And I guess you didn't see the high prices, which are often an indicator of the day when you might have reliability concerns. Maybe that was because it was a highly localized event, and that also was during the period, I guess, when when additional LNG was brought in, although that obviously didn't help the reliability aspect in Rhode Island. My understanding is the kind of the event that led to that was a failure of a LNG peak facility within Rhode Island.
Well, not only. So it was an issue of loss of power. I'll summarize. I might get this wrong, but I'll be close. Loss of power, loss of the backup power supply because of other events, an issue of communication between two, and the third incident was a valve on the transmission side that was, I'll summarize it, frozen or whatever, and when the operator chose to increase the pressure, come to find out, I'm going to make this up and I'll generalize it, instead of saying making it 10 times the pressure, that's what the command was, to make 10 times the pressure. I think it was in fact the inverse of that. It was 1/10. So when they went to make it 20 times, it went to 1/20th, which I believe, if I go back and look at the reports, I may get this wrong, and I'm sure some of my fellow commission members will correct me either directly. If they can, that's great. If they can't, after this, I will be corrected, and I stand to be corrected, was an issue with regards to either the software or the firmware, I suspect in the SCADA system or in the valve system, that caused that problem to manifest itself. So it were 3 issues that all had a confluence that came together at the same time that caused that problem to occur.
Yeah, I have looked at the report, and I think, and I corrected too, it seems like there also was an issue of, and this kind of gets back to one of the slides we were looking at, the slide that was talking about non-ratable takes. My recollection is there were some non-ratable takes occurring on Algonquin, and that they had a notice to please be in balance. So that probably was a contributing factor to loss of pressure.
So Thomas, I have an appreciation for what that is. I'm not certain I can tell you the denotation of that. Maybe others can as well. Can you just explain very briefly ratable takes?
It means if, typically a pipeline wants to see the daily capacity divided by 24 so that you're taking it on an even basis, average basis for each hour. There is some leeway the pipelines will offer, but on a day, as you've described this day in January, with the highly cold weather, and again, I may be corrected, but recollection from looking at the report is that the pipeline had a notice to please be in balance, but some of the end users were taking greater than greater than their daily capacity divided by 24, and maybe even greater than their daily capacity, I'm not sure. But that the PHMSA investigators said that that led to the pressure problem, was a great contributor to the pressure problem than the valve malfunction, which was rather fleeting and resolved that morning.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Other questions?
From
Sorry. Go ahead, Thomas.
I was just going to say, if you're looking at the event and the pipeline had a notice and was asking shippers to adhere to their tariff, it would be hard to find fault with the pipeline. And again, that's just thinking about a cursory examination of the events as they occurred.
Thank you. Other questions, comments
Palmer?
for Thomas? Senator 70.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. So, on that very point, I'm trying to remember now whether or not there was a corrective action to that issue with the rateable use of a pipeline. I mean, can this occur again if the users along that pipeline don't comply with the notice? I mean, can this happen again?
Yeah, I mean, yes, in theory. I mean, in this case, I think as the Senator pointed out, there were several other contributing factors, be it the software,
Yeah.
But I mean, in theory, the pipeline has most pipelines do have the right during system stress to request certain tolerances with regards to withdrawal. And in theory, yes, it could happen. And I'm thinking back. Texas has been in the news a lot. In 2011, has also been in the news a lot. The Southwest had that other cold weather event, and what you saw then was a lot of excess draws on the El Paso system, and the pipeline suffered a low pressure force majeure, and ultimately 50,000 customers lost their gas supply. So the answer is yes. That would be an extreme condition, but it's not something that I'm saying would happen. It just points to the need for careful peak day planning, be it additional pipeline capacity or ensuring the logistics of the LNG peak capacity is available. Because New England doesn't have storage, it does make it a little more of a challenge than in an area like the Midwest, which has a lot of storage, or parts of the Appalachian and Northeast outside of New England.
A little bit of storage now, at least for this local area.
So Thomas,
And everybody hates it.
You have a local, like, you're talking LNG storage, or? Yeah, I mean, traditional underground reservoir storage, I guess is what I'm saying.
No, yeah, all right. Now we're talking about trucked-in storage.
Yeah, understood.
in fact, in a neighborhood. So not very exciting to be next to that when they're potentially going to operate. So good point. I want to make clear when I say doesn't have storage, I'm talking about traditional underground reservoir storage. Understanding New England, relies on the LNG storage. Thank you. Other questions for Thomas?
That particular day, Senator DePalma, could we put numbers on how much local storage we would have needed to mitigate the main problem?
So I'm not going to answer your question directly, Bill. I'll answer it the way, I'll answer it indirectly. I'm sure that we'll get that answer, Bill. But I think part of the issue was we came down to 50% of the pressure came down 50%, I believe, from what it should have been. So I'm not certain we needed 50% more or 30%. I'm not certain it's all relative. It's absolute or it's all relative, linear or exponential, but we'll get that number. So Tom, with regards to...
Thank you very much. I really think trucking over the roads with LNG is a problem waiting to happen.
Absolutely. And as Senator 70 brought up, having it sitting there as well is probably not that great either in a neighborhood. Thomas,
I think that brings up really interesting evaluations that folks need to do, the trucking of LNG versus the pipes. The idea with the pipe, it's a long-term commitment with declining gas usage, but on the other hand, that declining gas usage is over 30 years. So there's just a lot of analytical issues to examine.
And I think, Thomas, part of the challenge or struggle we have on both ends is we're clearly migrating more towards renewables. It's happening. It's going to continue to occur. That's not going to stop. As we look at that, where's the balance to ensure we have a resilient and reliable infrastructure? Because if you have gas in your house, whether it's heating your home, whether it's cooking your food, whether it's drying your clothes, whether it's heating your water, etc., the likelihood of you tomorrow saying, I'm getting rid of those is pretty slim. When the time comes to replace those, different story. So there's a time of how do we get there, some crescendo invest. We need to figure out how do we put advantages out there, ensure folks to get it's the right thing to do. We need to get there, but we have to figure out in this interim period, how do we ensure we have a resilient and reliable infrastructure? So I had one last question, well, one specific question and one last general question. There's always concern on the cybersecurity side of the SCADA systems, the systems that control, all of the movement of natural gas from point A to point B, wherever point A to point B is. How does FERC, or what does FERC do as it relates to, if anything, ensuring that our systems are cyber safe?
That's a really good question. I can't be of much help. We have a cybersecurity effort. The pipeline themselves likely all have cybersecurity efforts. And that's about all I know. I'm sorry. The information, as you would suspect, is a lot of it's closely guarded, even classified. I guess it's just not widely available. So other than to know that we have an effort, as does the industry, I really can't comment much on that. And also to agree that it is an issue, or it's an important issue
we would never ask anybody to divulge what your cyber vulnerabilities are by any means. It's the case to know that. My question with regards to FERC, you have a cybersecurity initiative. Does FERC have purview or oversight, accountability with regards to ensuring the pipelines are cyber safe? Do you do some type of tabletop exercise, go out and check the system, test the systems? How can we, as the state of Rhode Island or across the country, do we ensure that the natural gas systems are, in fact, they're again, resilient and reliability, also can manifest themselves in ensuring they're cyber safe? Does FERC do that as well?
I don't think we have regulatory mandates. I think other agencies have more of a role, and we're in consultation with those other agencies. I would say that most of the pipelines, and there's always going to be exceptions, most of the pipelines are able to reroute and move gas. So if there is an incident, they're usually able to accommodate that fairly well. Even, in cases where there have been explosions, say in the Midwest, there's usually not much of a glitch in service. We could try to get back to you maybe with a bit better prepared answer on the cybersecurity.
Thank you, Thomas. Much appreciated.
Yeah, that, and I think there was a question about the free off hydrogen, if that's a concern. Correct. I think there too.
Okay. I have one other question, but any commission members have any other questions? I do want to recognize Senator Oyer and Senator Dela Cruz are here as well, I believe. So thank you for being here. So one last question I have, Thomas, if you were us looking to ensure we have a resilient and reliable natural gas transmission and distribution system infrastructure, are there states or territories or regions that have done that we should go look and pattern ours after? Because at the end of the day, if we don't do that, we're all remiss in not achieving the goal and the charge we've been given.
Well, that's a good point. New England is a little unique, I guess, in that it has been historically somewhat underpipe, maybe relative to the rest of the country, certainly relative to the Midwest or the South. Maybe, I feel like maybe the issues aren't similar, but California's given a lot of thought to this issue, and that, they're highly progressive with regards to renewables. And also, especially in Southern California, the issues they've had with the Aliso Canyon, which was a large underground natural storage field that had methane leaks, thus they had to shut it in, put some their system, especially in the Los Angeles area. That it's not the same, but that's one state, at least they've had to grapple with some of the same concerns.
Okay, thank you.
And I know they've also given a lot of thought, and there's consulting studies that have been issued to CAISO that look at the amount of gas generation necessary to maintain a reliable load, given high renewable penetration that are well done and would be good to study.
Thomas, thank you very much. Before we let Thomas go, going once, twice, 3 times to any other commission members with any questions. Well, thank you. Just before you leave, Thomas, and commission members, as we indicated, our role and goal and approach here is to, and some will remember this, our goal is to understand and appreciate the current state we have as it relates to electricity from a transmission and distribution system, infrastructure system perspective. Additionally, natural gas from a transmission and distribution infrastructure system perspective. I think we now have a piece of that puzzle been put together on the electricity side and the natural gas side by the hearing we had in December, and now the one we've had in now in March. I had wanted to have this in January. I do want to thank Keith, if he's still on the line. Keith and I went back and forth. If we went back and forth 10 times via email, probably another 10 phone calls, probably another 7 or 8 text messages. We became maybe best friends, maybe not. But then we were able to secure Thomas in the presentation today. So thank you for that. So commission members, moving forward from here, we'll be working probably to meet on a monthly basis now to move forward. Now that we have an appreciation, I think I have a better appreciation, an awareness, understanding as it relates to electricity and natural gas, to now take the next steps and hear from some of our specific commission members as we move forward into our next steps. The backdrop of all that, commission members, I'm sure everyone's aware of the announcement last week by Pennsylvania Power and Light to acquire these are my words, I may have it wrong, the assets in Rhode Island of National Grid. We'll put the rest of the things aside with regards to other parts of the agreement. But as part of that, we need to ensure the charge of the commission, the reliability, the resiliency of our natural gas and electric transmission distribution system remain. Obviously, we're still Algonquin. The pipe from Enbridge is still a critical part of that. On the electricity side, it's predominantly National Grid. That's going to take some time. Obviously, that's 12 to 18 and number of months away. I believe FERC will be a reviewer of that. I think that's correct, Thomas. FERC will be looking at that potential acquisition, merger, or acquisition of assets and transfer of assets in a different direction. So keep that in the back of our mind. It doesn't make our issue go away. It just, in fact, ensures our issue of resiliency and reliability will remain forefront as that discussion goes forward and those assets are looking to be transitioned, secured, purchased, whatever, in the coming months, year plus, should it get the regulatory approval at the federal, I guess international as well for some things, for the pieces in the UK, and then the state level. So with all that said, commission members, thank you very much. Thomas, thank you for all your work here today. Keith, thank you again. I'm sure we'll reach out to you. I know we have a couple of questions and a couple actions. If you can get back to us at whenever's appropriate, we thank you for that, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you, folks. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you.
Thank you all for the good questions.
Thank you.